Well, greetings. Welcome to The Dividing Line. I'm supposed to do a Vanna White thing and remind you we have a raffle going on for this beautiful cross and this beautiful Bible. So there you go. I held them up and I said we have a raffle going on. I'm not even sure, honestly, where is it on the front page? Link's on the front page. There you go. And there you go. We are just so good at doing this kind of advertising stuff. Well, actually, you know, when Rich runs in with it, 30 seconds before the program starts, what can I do? There you go. And it's going all the way through the month, as I recall. So we may run out of raffle tickets. I really don't think so. But in fact, I don't think that's really possible. But anyway, welcome to the program. We got a lot to get to today. Not exactly sure where to start with everything because I do have a lot of stuff here and I have to keep putting it up on one thing here. We'll go ahead and start with this, I guess. I'm trying to think where I put this. King James onlyism. You'd think by now it would have maybe gone away or something. It'd be nice if it would, but it just seems to mutate and just take on new forms all the time. And so I don't go looking for this stuff. One of the reasons I stay on Twitter, honestly, is because stuff will just appear out of nowhere. And by the way, I know lots of other people. I'm not questioning that anyone else is having this problem, but and I haven't seen you say anything about it, but you do weird things on Twitter. But everyone talks about porn bots on Twitter. I have never had that happen to me. I have encountered it when you get down to your end of your replies, they'll say, click here for more replies. And sometimes they'll even say, some of which may be offensive, so on and so forth. If you click on that, then you can find stuff. But there are people saying that they're just scrolling along and all of a sudden there it is on the screen. I've never had that happen.
I've never had it happen. I've had circumstance. I have my account locked down, so you have to do a friend request, and I screen everybody.
Oh, well, okay. See, I don't have any of that.
But the only thing I would get in that's even close to that is I get these random people with no followers. No, they're not following anybody. They want to follow me, and it's like, no. That's the closest thing. And even those pictures aren't in that category. So I've seen it in other platforms, but not Twitter.
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't think that my account is set up in such a way that would be precluded. But anyway, as I was saying, the reason that one of the reasons I prefer Twitter to everything else is stuff will just come by that I would not see otherwise. I don't have time to be searching for this kind of stuff. But that's really interesting. So Jonathan Burris is a pastor who will take on a lot of this King James stuff. And so I happened to see that he had posted a video titled KJV Pure Bible Search, Horrible Hermeneutics. And so I clicked on it and I started watching it. And I discover an app, which I think I did install it on this computer, which may be dangerous. But it is an app designed specifically to help you come up with numerological arguments for the King James Version of the Bible. Now, Mormons have done this with the Book of Mormon. Muslims have done it with the Quran. I think it was the late 90s. There was a big surge of Bible numerology, the Bible code stuff. And I remember I lost some friends in the then just developing internet stuff. Well, yeah, because now I think about it, the IRC channel, we actually started that in '96. So yeah, I remember some people going off and getting involved with all that stuff, and I was going, "This is ridiculous. This is absurd." And so they decided I was a terrible, horrible, bad person. So here is an entire app that you can get to allow you to come up with numerological arguments for the King James Bible. And just a reminder of some basic facts that I recognize not everyone is aware of. I wasn't aware of as a young person. I still remember sitting in a church service once and finally asking myself the question, why does the pastor keep referring to Greek? We read English. What's the issue? And once you start learning a little something, you hopefully learn something about how the Bible came together, and that it wasn't written in English, and that English is a translation, that there have been many, many English translations, and that the English translations have been based upon different and differing Greek and Hebrew manuscripts, collations of Greek and Hebrew manuscripts, and printed editions, and all sorts of stuff like that. And so once you understand that, once you start getting a little of that down, then a lot of this stuff just starts looking really silly, this King James only stuff. Because what they're doing is they're basing so much on the English translation. And of course, you've got the Blaney revision, you've got the Oxford, you've got the Cambridge. There's going to be differences between them. And different editions of the King James and all sorts of stuff like that. But then, so the English isn't a fixed body. And so counting words, or this word appears at this point in this book or something like that, can be thrown off by just the small number of changes as you would have even between the Cambridge and Oxford, or between the 1611 and the 1769, or something like that, 1789. So, and then now maybe I understand why there were people when I was very much younger who were so upset about the New Schofield, because the New Schofield changed the King James. That would throw all the numerology out. Anyway, but all of that is just in the English translation. It doesn't reflect the text that was inspired by God in the first place. And the reality that they will use chapter and verse numeration as having some kind of great significance. The chapter and verse stuff is relatively modern. I've pointed to the 1550 Stephanus back there over and over again. It does not have verse numbers in it, because it was the next year, 1551, that Stephanus inserted the verse numeration system that we use today. And so 1,500 years had passed since the resurrection of Jesus, and no one had ever referred to John 3:16 because there were no verse numbers. And so when they use verse numbers and then make connections, it's just so artificial. It is so silly. It's so childish because it ignores the history of the text. And yet they just do it, and they are utterly they do not apologize for what they're doing. I don't think we tested the sound, so we will find out fairly quickly whether this is going to work or not. I think this is where it belongs, as far as the position goes. But Brother Burris is responding to a guy who's using this app to make an argument based upon Deuteronomy 16:11. Now think about it for a second. 16:11. You cannot be a rational person and think there is a connection between the year 1611. And by the way, even that has changed. I mean, Julian calendar, all that stuff. That when do you really start it? All the rest of that kind of stuff. So 1611, the year, and Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 11. There was no Deuteronomy 16:11 until the Middle Ages, and no verse 11 until a period of time after that. It's all editorial. It's not inspired. If you say it's inspired, then you have a continuing inspiration theory, and King James onlyists don't have any problem with that. That's why King James onlyism is completely indefensible and is on the exact same cultic level as people who defend the Book of Mormon or use numerology from the Quran and all the rest of this kind of wild, wacky, strange stuff. But there's lots of folks that want the esoteric. They want the strange. They want the Gnostic knowledge that nobody else has. See? And that's how they do it. So I think I have it at the right point here. And I'm not going to ask Brother Burris about the guy down there next to him. I wear cat shirts, so I can't be overly... What? Picard? Okay, it's a warp core. Come on. That's me in a Kuji. So yeah, what's the problem? I mean, I've got enough swords in here to fight off about 3 dozen samurai. But manuscripts, lots of Bibles and books. What are you talking about? There are no robots in here that I can see anywhere. So there you go. I'm sure I'll get a comment on Twitter from the brother once he sees this. Let's see if I've got this in the right spot. Let's see if we can get started here.
I don't know what you're going to believe. You'll at least be able to see why people like me believe this is a fulfilled prophecy. So if you turn your Bibles to Deuteronomy...
Now, did you catch that? Fulfilled prophecy. Fulfilled prophecy. Listen to that. Fulfilled prophecy is Isaiah 53. Fulfilled prophecy is Psalm 22, Psalm 2, Psalm 110. That's fulfilled prophecy. Okay, the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, prophesied by Jesus himself as a prophet, that is fulfilled prophecy. Matthew chapter 24, that's fulfilled prophecy. But making up numerology out of an English translation is not prophecy. And when you make it fulfilled prophecy, you are fundamentally degrading the validity of actual fulfilled prophecy. Something to keep in mind.
Deuteronomy 16:11.
Okay, Deuteronomy 16:11. Let's well, look at that. Now we can watch Accordance coming up. Guess I thought it was up, but evidently I took it down. But okay, Deuteronomy 16:11. DEU 16:11. If I don't want it, if I do that, then the other one disappears, and I've got to play games with it and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So I'll blow it up just a little bit here, so it's a little bit easier to see. And I'm going to keep the Hebrew and the Greek because it's a reminder that the English came long, long, long after it. And you shall rejoice before Yahweh your God, Eloheka. You and your son and your daughter and your male and female servants, and the Levite who is in your town, and the stranger, and the orphan and the widow who are in your midst, taking too long here at the end, in the place where is chosen by Yahweh, your God, to establish his name there. So, this has a historical context to it, obviously. It is a command that the people of God, all of the people, so you and your son and your daughter and your male and female servant, Levite, it is to be a cultural thing. Even the stranger and the orphan and the widow who are in your midst, that everyone is to rejoice before Yahweh your God, and you shall remember, the next verse, that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall be careful to observe these statutes. So, this is a command to the people of Israel that across the entire culture, you have this celebration and this remembrance of their deliverance out of Egypt and slavery in Egypt, and a reminder that they are to be careful to observe these statutes. So you shall, verse 13, you shall celebrate the Feast of Booths 7 days after you have gathered in from your threshing floor and your wine vat. So you're gathering in, you're seeing the blessings of Yahweh. Yahweh has made your crops to grow, has given you rain and the sun, and has protected you from marauding people to steal these things from you and everything else. So there's a context here. And it's a context that we can make application today. And we should make application today. We all have so much. We have so much food. We have homes. We have transportation. And all these things come from God's hands, and we rarely thank him for the many things that we receive from him. And even remembrance of our slavery to sin and our deliverance from that. So here's the historical context. Here's the reality of what's going on here. This has nothing to do with the year 1611. When you connect it to the year 1611, you make a mockery of the Bible. You make a mockery of its message. It has nothing to do with what takes place in and around London, other cities, between 1604 and 1611. Okay? In fact, let me 1604. For 7 days, no leaven. For 7 days, no leaven shall be seen with you in all your territory, and none of the flesh which you sacrifice on the evening of the first day shall remain overnight until morning. There you go. That has something to do with King James ordering the translation of the King James, because that's 1604. Because that's 1604, 7 years to 1611. It has to have something to do with it, right? If we're going to be consistent, right? Well, we don't have to be consistent. That's the same wackiness that we've been dealing with. I've talked about so many times when the Roman Catholics start trying to draw all these parallels between the Ark of the Covenant and Mary and 6 months in the hill country of Judea and you pick and choose. I'll make a connection here. The verse after, no. I'll put dates in it. No, don't. I'll just do the one thing here. Put it together, and anybody can do that with anything and prove anything divine. Like I said, the Mormons do it with the Book of Mormon. The Muslims do it with the Quran. I don't know if the Hindus and the Buddhists do anything like this or not. I would assume they probably do. I just don't know enough about them to tell you. But yeah, there you go. So there's Deuteronomy 16:11. And please notice The use of the term Lord, Yahweh, it occurs twice. Yahweh your God occurs twice in Deuteronomy 16:11. And let me see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. And Yahweh, even in, this is the NASB 95. It keeps defaulting back to that. I can't get it to stop doing it. It's just been doing it so many years, it doesn't know what else to do. It's the seventh word. And I've heard them say, oh, the seventh word, and go on from there. So let me, yeah. All right. It's not as pretty. Now that's interesting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's still 7. You shall be glad before Yahweh your God is the Legacy Standard version of that one. So, but notice it's Yahweh. So we continue on with the King James only stuff here.
We're going to start there, but this is just the beginning. Deuteronomy 16:11, of course, has the reference of chapter and verse that directly takes you to the year 1611 when the King James Bible was first printed. It was all.
Now just think for a second how utterly absurd this is in light of when it was written. Now you could say, well, God is the God of history, and so God knew that it was going to be 1611, and God knew that the chapters were going to be there and the verses were going to be. You can play all those games that you want to play and come up with all the connections you want to come up with. But as I said, when you're sitting across the table from a Muslim that does the same thing with the Quran, you got nothing to say. You've got nothing to say. You're stuck. You're guilty of using the same foolishness that they're using, so you can't argue against that. All you can do is my numerology versus your numerology. And there's no way of knowing which one's true because they're disconnected from reality.
Authorized in 1604. They took 7 years to translate it. And the King James Bible that we have today was first printed in 1611, and over time, there were standardizations, and we'll get to that soon. But in Deuteronomy 16:11, it says something interesting. It says, "And thou shalt rejoice before the Lord thy God, thou and thy son, and thy daughter, and thy manservant, and thy maidservant, and the Levite that is within thy gates, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow that are among you." Now listen to this. "In the place which the Lord thy God hath chosen to place his name there."
All right, so let's stop for just a moment and let me give you the crux of what he's going to present in this hour and 13-minute video. We are not going to watch all of this video. I'm not going to play it. I've got about 8 or 9 clips that I've marked to be able to play for you, but this video is not going to be that long. We're not going to do that. So I'm going to summarize it. I'm going to link to this video. I want to encourage you to watch it, hear what he has to say, and see how he uses this text and uses this script, this application to defend his King James Version onlyism. In this verse, you're going to see a myriad of exaggerations, of misuses, and I'm going to say eisegesis, where he is just simply going to take the text out of its context, read something else into it, use other text to defend his position that is really just confirmation bias. And I know that is a huge accusation just from the get-go, and you've not seen much from him in that regard right now. But suffice to say, I'm going to use the application, use the tools, or use the method that he presents in this video, and I'm going to show you the results that he gets and how he uses that to defend his position. So if we go over to, before we do that, let's go back to the app for just a minute. And
now, I want you to see this app because it is fascinating. I mean, it is interesting to see. And what he does is he summarizes his argument before he then tears his argument apart. And I'll try to remember to link, obviously, in the write-up so you can watch this for yourself. But it's understandable if you don't know anything about the background of the Bible, if you know nothing about how it's translated, if you're just an ignorant person, and there are lots of ignorant people, if you're an ignorant person, this kind of argumentation can sound absolutely, and in a day where the Bible's being attacked, don't you want to have arguments like this? Yes, but you want to have truthful arguments, not fallacious arguments.
Listen to what his premise is. If we go to
is 100% agreed upon between Jewish and Christians alike to be God's perfect number of rest and completion and perfection. Now, of course, there's many verses in the King James Bible where Lord is the seventh word of the verse. I'm not saying that is any sort of proof. But watch how it builds on top of each other. Watch how many patterns converge into one place in this verse. You'll notice.
So what he's doing is he's going to assert, and let me pull up Deuteronomy 16:11. In
So watch how
Deuteronomy
this works.
16:11, he's going to assert that the word Lord is the seventh word in the verse, and then also in Deuteronomy 16:11, since the word Lord appears twice in that verse, it's also the 49th word in that verse. 7 being the number of completion, 7 times 7 being 49, so that is a miraculous thing in and of itself. Not only that, but he's going to, in order to save some time, and again, watch the video, watch it so you see it, and so you know that I haven't taken anything and exaggerated it or taken it out of its context or misrepresented him in any way. It's also Deuteronomy 16:11, and so it's pointing to the 16:11, the King James Bible from 16:11. There is another thing that is mentioned there. It's the phrase, his name. What he's going to do is assert that this is another miraculous sign that the King James Bible is perfect because it has this phrase, his name, and it happens to be the 49th example or the 49th occurrence of the phrase, his name. So before we have any more commentary on those things, let me actually show you from the tool how he gets that, and that, yeah, he's technically.
By the way, this app is free, so you can check this stuff out for yourself. If you're want to play these types of games, but it is available, and I had not run into it before, so that's one of the reasons I wanted to mention it.
Right, I need to show you something very important in the tool. This is not the King James Version from 1611. If we go to the menu and go to Preferences, and we go down to Bible Databases, and we look and see what Bible databases are here, we have the King James Bible 1769 edition. So this is the Blaney revision, and if you're wondering, if you do not know, there are multiple editions of the Blaney revision, and there's the Oxford, there's the Cambridge. And they are, in fact, not the same. They have different wording. They have different spellings. They are not the same. If you're wondering which one this is the Cambridge version of the 1769 Blaney revision. So we're going to come over here. We're going to add a phrase. We're going to do just like he does in the video. We're going to search for Lord. When we put in Lord, we see that there are 7,836 occurrences. Now, what he's going to assert is that in Deuteronomy 16:11, that the first Lord in that verse is the 1611th occurrence of that verse, of that word in the Bible. So let's go down to Deuteronomy 16:11, and I'm going to show you how you can do this as well. So here we are, Deuteronomy 16 and verse number 11. I'm going to click right here. Now, at the very top in the menu, there is this icon. It says View Details. We're going to click that. Popped up over here for some reason, and I'm going to move it down here, and it is pinned, so it'll stay there. And when I click on verse 16 or Deuteronomy 16:11, it's going to show me right here that the first occurrence of Lord is the 1611th, and the next one is the 1612th of 7,836 occurrences of the word Lord. That is miraculous, right? It is if we look at all the times the word Lord appears in the King James Bible, when we get to Deuteronomy 16:11, that is the 1611th occurrence of the word Lord. Wow. Now, what he does in his video is he points out that there are different ways to look at, different ways the word Lord is used. Sometimes it's capital L, lowercase O-R-D. In other places, it's capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. And in the Hebrew, capital L and lowercase O-R-D is representative of Adonai. When you have Lord in all caps, that is the Tetragrammaton. That is the name of God, Yahweh. Whether you're looking at Lord or you're looking at Adonai, the 1611th occurrence of the word Lord in the King James Bible is the 1611th time. Next, I want you to see the phrase, his name. So we're going to come up here, we're going to change this, and we're going to look at his name. We're going to see, let's go back to Deuteronomy 16:11. And when we look there, we're going to see, yep, there it is. It is the 49th of 165 phrase occurrences. What is 49? It is 7 times 7. So we've seen that it is this, the Lord has the 1611th occurrence. It is the 7th word in the verse, and it's also the 49th word in the verse. So 7 times 7, 49. And then we have the phrase his name. So if we count up all the times that the phrase his name occurs in the King James Bible and the King James Version, using that terminology, that it adds up to, it becomes the 49th occurrence. What a miracle, right?
Okay, so I'm not going to play the whole thing. What? Yep. Rich just converted to King James onlyism. So now he's going to go through and demonstrate that what the thing is counting is going to include other uses, which makes it completely irrelevant as to that. May I point out that, for example, the canon order in the King James Bible is not the same as the Hebrew Bible. So early on, it's the same, obviously. But the canon order of the scrolls, for example, that Jesus would have, when he was handed the scroll of Isaiah, how did the Jews understand the order of their canon? Completely different. The minor prophets all considered one book. Other books made part of other books. And the historical works are the end. They're not in the middle. They're at the end. So after you get out of the first 5 books, basically, all that stuff just flies out the window. Unless you again want to make the argument that God's people were irrelevant up until the Reformation in England. And I've encountered people who really do take that perspective. They don't care what scriptures were in the possession of the people defending the deity of Christ in the 4th century. They don't care. They only care about what's in their leather-bound, thumb-indexed Bibles, King James Bibles, in their Fundamentalist Baptist Church today. So, all of this stuff, if you know anything about the history, if you know about the order of the canon, chapters, verses, translation, that this stuff is conflating Yahweh with Adonai, and sometimes even references that don't have anything to do with God at all. So the 1611th is irrelevant. I think I don't remember, but I think there are places where his name isn't even about Yahweh's name. So I think the original source for a lot of this stuff was Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, because that's all people had for a long time. That's all people even knew how to use, if they even. And I remember the first time someone started pointing me to Strong's Concordance, and that's really cool. I didn't. There's so much information here, but it's not information about how the scriptures were originally written. It's about how they were translated into English in a certain form at a certain time a millennia and a half after the time of Christ. And hey, if that can give you really cool stuff to amaze your friends with, evidently for a lot of folks, that's all you really need. You don't have to worry about whether it's truthful or any of the rest of that kind of stuff. So I will try to remember to post the link for that when I write up the material after the program, and hopefully that will be of assistance to you. Here we go. Whoop, stop that. All right. Now, I saw this little video from Dan McClellan. Now, I haven't spent a whole lot of time with Dan McClellan. He is, as far as I can tell, is still a member of the LDS Church. I'm not sure how that works. McClellan is a part of the, well, I've talked before how there was very clearly a decision made a number of years ago to try to mainstream Mormonism. And so instead of just having the best and the brightest just study at BYU and just get degrees from BYU or the University of Utah or whatever else, they started sending their graduates out to Ivy League schools, big name schools, get degrees that would be really impressive to the world. The problem is, once you took your best and your brightest and got them out of the Intermountain West and sent them off to these places, they're going to encounter critical theory, not critical theory as what we're talking about today with critical race theory and stuff like that, but they're going to be taught to analyze religious texts, hopefully with some kind of consistency in the context in which they were originally produced. And the problem with this, and I've seen this happening a lot, this is one of the major things causing changes within Mormonism today, is they come back to Utah, they start teaching at BYU or wherever else, and they bring this critical methodology with them. And here's the problem. None of the LDS scriptures can even begin to survive critical analysis. If you're doing text critical analysis of the New Testament, at least you're dealing with an ancient document. You're not even dealing with an ancient document, the Book of Mormon. And when you look at the changes that have been made in the Book of Mormon, there's a LDS scholar, we've talked about this on the program before, is an LDS scholar who has done a rather fine English translation for Mormons of the New Testament from the critical edition of the Greek New Testament. Here's the problem. The Book of Mormon, when it quotes the New Testament, is quoting from the 1769 Blaney revision of the King James Version of the Bible, which means it's quoting from an English translation of the Textus Receptus, which is not a critical, well, okay, technically it is a critical edition, but not in the modern sense, of a textual critically arrived at text. The Textus Receptus is basically the result of the King James translators looking at the 5 editions of Erasmus, Stephanus, those of Beza, especially 1598, and making textual decisions, not purposely trying to create a Greek text at all. And it wasn't the same translators either. So you'd have one group of translators dealing with the Gospels, a different group of translators dealing with Pauline epistles, and they're going to make different textual decisions. And so that's why it's not technically a critical text in that sense, because it's not the same group of people applying the same standards. Anyway, the point is, if you're translating the New Testament from the best text that we can arrive at today, which this scholar did up in Utah, that means you're going to come up with readings different than what Joseph Smith did in the Book of Mormon. How are you going to explain that? because Joseph Smith's giving us an inspired translation, if you call the Urim and the Thummim or the Seer Stone an inspired translation. So how do you fit that together with your textual critical work? And that's the problem that Mormonism is facing right now, is by sending these guys out, then bring them back in, they injected directly into the bloodstream of Mormonism an absolute poison. And I remember talking with some Mormons not too long ago, and I was just stunned at their willingness to go, yeah, Joseph Smith, he had some problems, some issues. He didn't understand this, didn't understand that. But, we've come to understand prophet in a very different way than it was understood in the past. I'm like, yeah? Then it's been understood by Joseph Fielding Smith, by the people who said Joseph Smith was either a prophet divinely called or he was a fraud. There is no middle ground, And now they're like, oh, no. That's way too black and white. Where did all this come from? Well, that's where it's coming from. You have to come up with some very different way of looking at the LDS scriptures. If you're going to have these people coming in and applying critical methodology and stuff like that. So it really doesn't work well. So this, I have a feeling this is going to start playing. Okay. Now, why does it keep doing that? Okay. For some reason, and I don't know why, the app that I've been using to download video files, QuickTime Player does not like the result. So I'm having to use VLC, and VLC can be a little bit weird. But let's get it starting here, and we'll comment on what goes down.
All right, let's see it.
Okay, so here's what Dan McClellan, active member of the LDS Church, degrees from outside of Mormonism in various fields of, especially expressions of divine names and images and stuff. So here's what it says. Me explaining that out of 7,957 New Testament verses, only 40 can't be resolved with textual criticism compared to 25,000 ancient manuscripts, making its accuracy 99.5%. Okay, let's start off. That is a muddled mess. Okay, that's just... all due respect to whatever kind believer was trying to make a point here, but that's not even English sense, let alone a real good representation. Me explaining that out of 7,957 New Testament verses, okay, only 40 can't be resolved with textual criticism. Now, what does that even mean? What are you saying? 40 verses? 40 verses? Variants are rarely just a verse. And what do you mean can't be resolved? Are you saying that we can't know what the original reading was? That the original reading has been lost? So I don't know where this is coming from, but I wouldn't even agree with that. And can't be resolved with textual criticism. You mean by means of analysis of manuscripts, analysis of the kinds of variants that arise from the copying of manuscripts, sight, errors of hearing, homoteleuton, all, are we talking about, is that what we're talking about? I would assume so, but most of the time people who do textual criticism would not use this type of language. Can't be resolved with textual criticism. And then compared to 25,000 ancient manuscripts, making its accuracy 99.5%, makes absolutely positively no sense at all. You're mixing all sorts of different categories here. You could literally have 10 variants in a single verse. I've seen, now it's extremely rare. I've seen entire verses in Hebrews, for example, where there was no variant even noted that had any meaning whatsoever. But this is comparing examples of a variant in a verse with how many manuscripts you have and coming up with an accuracy number. Sorry, that's just not how to do it. Let me show you before we get to McClellan here. Let me show you how things have improved over the years. And I'll do it with this. Here is, and this is all available online. We just spent a chunk of change from the ministry resource list. We keep talking about the travel fund, which is extremely needful and necessary, and we're doing a bunch of work on the RV right now, and that's what these are for. The raffles helps the travel fund. So, and Derek just texted me and said he'll be getting on that blade when he gets back from a trip he's taking right now. So that's the travel fund. But there's also, now is that still available? Ministry resource list used to be an Amazon wish list. Many. Wow, that was a long time ago. But the ministry resource list allows us to get hold of stuff like this. Hopefully by early September, the next installment of the ECM will be published, finally. There have been frustrating delays thanks to COVID. I think some of you, 3 or 4 of you in the audience will remember that in January 2019, I visited Munster, where the central hub for all this work on the Editio Critica Major ECM. I don't have any of my ECM volumes in here right now, but the ECM will be the largest published critical edition of the Greek New Testament ever. It'll be huge. Huge. And we can't say that. He's a convicted criminal now, right? Anyway, it'll be the greatest. The world's never seen anything like it. So the book of Revelation. Now, so far, Mark, Acts, and the general epistles that's done, and those are published. And you can go online, and this is Mark. This is University of Munster. This is Mark chapter 14, verse 62. We'll blow it up here in a second. And so I would assume that by September, the Revelation module will be available online as well. So you don't have to buy these. You can go online. They are really improving the ability to make changes and stuff like that. This is called CBGM, Coherent Space Genealogical Methodology, and again, you don't have to buy a subscription or anything like that. It's available. So, for example, this is Mark chapter 14, verse 62, variant number 9. So you put the numbers are the words are even numbers, the spaces are odd numbers. So you'll notice there's a little mark right here where there is a variant, and so it will give you an apparatus. So Mark 14:6-2 is in Jesus's trial. Jesus said to them, I am, and you will see the Son of Man, seated at the right hand of power and coming upon the clouds of heaven. So this is where Jesus takes Psalm 110 and Daniel 7 and conflates them in reference to himself, identifying himself as the Son of Man, divine figure. This is why the chief priest tears his robes and says, you've heard the blasphemy, etc., etc. So there is an interesting variant that you can see here on the screen. And you'll notice that it says AOM, which has nothing to do with Alpha and Omega Ministries, though if I was a King James onlyist, I could find some way to make a connection. But anyways, so all of these witnesses do not have a variant at that point. The B variant is auto. So it would be, and Jesus said to him, that would be to the high priest. And then variant C is said to him, you say that, or you said that. Variant D doesn't have him, just simply you said that. And then variant E, Jesus said that, and then I am, ego eimi, and you will see the Son of Man, so on and so forth. Okay? So here are all the manuscripts. So for example, Hatzi is only found in 2517. If you want to know about 2517, you can click on it and get information and so on and so forth. This variant's only found in manuscript 700. There's more manuscripts that have the you say that, and then more that have just the auto. But the large portion of the collated manuscripts for Mark do not have any variant there at all. So there you have that kind of information, and then it starts breaking stuff down for you, which is just fascinating. So here is the CBGM's way of saying, okay, variant A is the no variant. There's nothing there. And B, C, D, and E we can all see how they were derived from that particular variant. And then by color coding them that way, then you can start looking at the primary witnesses and how they relate to one another. So here's your B witnesses, your D, your E, C witnesses, and how they are. And now what the computer is doing is it is drawing connections between these manuscripts based upon their coherence. There is pre-genealogical and genealogical coherence. And basically the computer can do what the human mind cannot do, and that is keep massive amounts of data points in memory. And so you can go, I want to know, when you look at manuscript 2737 and you look at manuscript 1515, how many times do they vary from one another? How many times do they have the exact same reading? And when there is a variation, how many times does one join with the other one or differ from the other one? And the computer can do all that. The human mind cannot. God just didn't design us to do that. There are a few weird people who might be able to do that. We've seen movies about them, Rain Man and stuff like that. But most of us normal human beings can't do that. So the point is, when we talk about percentages of identity coherence, once the ECM is published, which when I was in Munster, I was told then by the man in charge of all of it, who was retiring shortly after that, that they had funding through 2030. It seems that John, which was farmed out to Birmingham, has stalled. That really hurts me because most of the textual variants that are really relevant are in Paul and in John. But anyway, then you can go down from here. I'll finish showing this to you. And here is coherence in attestations, and I have to scroll across the screen because okay. So here the computer is taking us and giving us a relationship between all these manuscripts and how they're related via coherence to one another. And you can change, see these numbers here, you can change exactly what parameters the computer is using to produce these charts. And then you can look at general textual flow. So pop that up. Here's the general textual flow. So you can see with the color where the variations, you can follow where those variations are. So for example, I said to you, there's only one manuscript, 700, that has that one reading. And you can see where 700 specifically fits in relationship to other manuscripts as far as coherence is concerned. And you can just see how massive the amount of information available. No generation has ever had anything. Erasmus would be sitting here drooling, going, oh, wow. Beza, any of them would be going, wow, never dreamed that something like that could ever exist. So go ahead and take that down. So the point is that with CBGM in the ECM, so CBGM is a methodology, coherence-based genealogical methodology. ECM is being applied to the manuscripts to produce the ECM, the Editio Critica Maior, the major critical edition of the Greek New Testament, which is available online, but in the printed version, we are purchasing it as it comes out. That's part of, you help us do that with contributions to the ministry resource list. We just ordered Revelation. Again, it's supposed to be available in the U.S. from Hendrickson September 2nd, I believe. It is the most expensive one so far. And it's just one book. Mark, I think, was 4 volumes. So is Revelation. But Mark, I think, was only like 365. This thing's over 600. Why? Joe Biden, I think. Inflation? But this 4-volume set on Revelation is just under 2,000 pages long. It's huge. And why? Because Revelation has the most unique, challenging, textual history and background of any book in the New Testament. And I think it's because it had to fight for inclusion in the New Testament itself. There are a lot of people who rejected Revelation. They weren't certain that it had apostolic authorship. And as a result, we have the fewest papyri manuscripts of it. There really isn't a clearly identifiable majority text to it. The Byzantine divides all over the place in it. So a lot of us, the few hundred of us who actually have studied CBGM enough to even have a functional knowledge of it, are really, really interested in how this is going to work out. Because of all the books in the New Testament, I said when I first was introduced to CBGM a number of years ago, man, Revelations could be a mess. And here it is being published. I'm really excited to see that. I think there will be much more interest in John and the Pauline corpus. I can't imagine how big that's going to be, though. I can't imagine they'll do all of Paul. That'd be massive. I don't know how many volumes that would be. But when it gets done, it's going to be a pretty impressive thing on the shelf, that's for sure. So back to where we were here. When we look at this claim, and by the way, I just want to make sure, Dan McClellan's not making this claim. He's going to be responding to this claim. I just don't even know where it's coming from. Clearly, whoever did this doesn't know anything about CBGM, doesn't know anything about how you actually do textual criticism. And so, look, I'll be the first one to say, there's a book came out. I don't think I have it in here right now, but Myths and Mistakes in Textual Criticism, or something along those lines, I think is what it's called, came out, I don't know, 5 years ago now. And yeah, there's, I remember when Norm Geisler made very popular a real common mistake in how to count New Testament, count variations in the New Testament. And I remember hearing that from him. Thankfully, I was already in Greek class. And so I was already reading Metzger and Holland and people like that. And I was like, what's he talking about? So there is bad material out there. And we certainly have tried. And because of my background and because of the fact that a few weeks into my first year Greek class with Dr. Baird, who I had dinner with just a week ago now. Week ago tonight. No, week ago. Yeah, week ago tonight. My Greek professor for 7 years. Very early on that first year, I remember opening up the UBS back then, 3rd edition corrected. This is the 4th revised. And that was what we were using. It seemed like large print back then. I'm looking at the footnotes going, no way. Oh, man. Anyway. All of you young guys sitting there making fun of me right now, don't do it. Don't do it. It's going to happen to you too. That's why my reading glasses are right over there. And there's another. I've got my click ones right here. This is what you need. Go ahead. For the aging man in your life, go ahead and get him the click reading glasses. There you go. See, and then you can just go like that. Put them down. They hang around your neck, and they're very useful. And they're magnetic right here. They click. And hey, look at that. I can read all the footnotes again. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Anyway, I asked Dr. Baird. I remember where I was sitting. I remember what room I was in. That building doesn't exist anymore, sadly. Every single story building on that campus is gone. Has been replaced by big, massive buildings. But I remember exactly where I was, and I asked Dr. Baird, what are these notes at the bottom of the page? And he said, that's where the Greek manuscripts differ from one another. And I was already talking to Mormon missionaries. So I knew I had to delve into that. And Dr. Baird remembers that very, very well all these years later. So there you go. So there's that. It's after 4 o'clock already. So let's just start on this, and we'll continue with it, because I know our audience, and a bunch of you are just utterly unrepentant, inveterate geeks. Okay, that's just all there is to it. That's why you watch the program, and you love when we get into this stuff. You were sitting there watching the CBGM stuff, scrolling, and you were drooling. You really were. It was the only thing that makes you more excited is if we played the Radio Free Geneva theme beforehand, and at that point you would have passed out. That's all there is. So I'm not going to just rush through this, but he's responding to a poorly framed argument. CBGM can tell us, I forgot to finish making this point. CBGM can tell us what the exact coherence numbers are between individual manuscripts, all manuscripts that contain a particular corpus. So you can do a general number for Romans. You can compare Sinaiticus and Vaticanus in a chapter, in a book, and remember, like I was about to say in the New Testament, but Vaticanus doesn't contain the entire New Testament. It stops at Hebrews 9:14. So to get specific numbers, you have to be looking at specific texts or bodies of texts. But we can now generate those numbers. It's no longer a matter, when I first started studying all this stuff, this great scholar estimated this, estimated this number. But it's just a guess. We didn't have the massive amount of collations of manuscripts we have today. So now we can be much more specific. All right.
So there are 4 statements of fact in this image. One is uncontroversially true. One is close to being true, but is also wildly misleading. The other 2 are pure fabrication. The uncontroversially true statement is that there are 7,957 verses in the New Testament. The kind of true statement that is also wildly misleading is that there are 25,000 ancient manuscripts of the New Testament.
Okay. These numbers change regularly. Mainly because of ongoing efforts in cataloging. When it comes to the Greek New Testament manuscripts, that number between 5,600 and 5,800 keeps changing, especially thanks to CSNTM and their studying and their doing high-quality digital photography of manuscripts around the world. And when they do that, they discover, this manuscript actually isn't a separate manuscript, the same manuscript as that one, but part of it's here, part of it's there. Or they discovered their manuscripts that you open it up and discover that the last half is a different manuscript than the first half. So that would double the number there. The other thing would have the number there. The number keeps changing. And then the largest body of manuscripts you have are Latin manuscripts, obviously, copied in the West. And then, Armenian, Georgian, Ethiopic, Sahidic, Bohairic, just all these other manuscripts that, again, up until the last century, no one had any idea of these numbers. Nobody. You couldn't have. There was no way to get the university over there and the university over there to even use the same nomenclature to identify manuscripts with the same catalog number or name or whatever. It was a real problem when the first critical texts they're trying to produce first critical texts that utilized at least some portion of the available information out there. It was really, really, really hard, because what manuscript are we talking about? Well, I saw a manuscript at university in such and such a room, and such, and so eventually you did have a catalog system, and you start identifying the uncials one way and the minuscules another way, and you had to have some centralized place that would start gathering this information. At first, what they were doing is they were gathering microfilm. Well, that was better than nothing, but have you ever tried to use microfilm? It is not easy to do. Not easy to do. That's why CSNTM is so important. They're doing just massive, high-quality digital stuff. And, stuff that you could really dig down and do very close analysis of a tiny variant here, there, and everywhere, which you really You really couldn't do that with the microfilm. But you needed some place. Munster became the place that gathered all this information. Didn't gather all the manuscripts, but where the manuscripts were, identifying them, giving them numbers, provisional dates, stuff like that. And so, yeah, how many total? Really hard to say. You could, he's saying here it's actually a little over 27,000. Again, it depends on, how you are. It depends on how you are counting manuscripts. For example, I have a picture of me holding a portion of P92. I don't have time to look it up, but it was a very brief portion from Acts 2 and 3, which was at. I was examining it under glass in Sydney, Australia. The other portion of it is in Italy. So that can only be counted as one manuscript, but it's in two different pieces in two different places. So how do you count all that stuff? That's why you can only give round numbers to be at all fair in looking at this type of stuff.
It's actually a little over 27,000, but this counts all manuscripts in all languages from our earliest manuscript all the way down to the printing press.
In fact, a little past the printing press in some instances. So when you look at the Comma Johanneum, 1 John 5:7, some of the manuscripts that will be cited there are still handwritten manuscripts that were produced after the invention of the printing press. Sometimes over 100 years after the invention of the printing press. Just because you invented the printing press doesn't mean that there are a bunch of them running around. And for a long time, manuscript production continued to be by hand in Europe until the printing press began to have, Erasmus comes along and does his stuff, and Cardinal Jimenez and Complutensian Polyglot and all the rest of that kind of fun stuff. So the point he's going to make, and it's a very valid point and needs to be understood as a valid point, and I have tried over the years to warn people. Remember how I warned people? Well, okay, maybe you don't. Maybe you're one of those folks that's new. Back when I debated Bart Ehrman in 2009, during the audience questions, a kind, I'm sure very well-meaning, elderly Christian gentleman stands up. And as soon as he got the first sentence out of his mouth, I knew what was coming. I knew it was coming. He was going to do the Isaiah scroll argument. And the Isaiah scroll argument is a good argument if it's used properly. Most people don't know how to use it properly. And it is true that up until the discovery of the Isaiah scroll at Qumran, I have a picture of me lecturing on the deity of Christ standing in front of the cave where it was found. Sure, I'm glad I got to go that one time. The earliest manuscript we had at that time of Isaiah was from 900 years after Christ. The Isaiah scroll is from 100 years before Christ. So 1,000 years passed by. And when we look at the Isaiah scroll, there has been no changes. The Masoretic text type of the manuscripts we had from 900 years after Christ, identical. Now, that tells you properly that there does not of necessity have to be textual corruption in the promulgation, the copying of ancient manuscripts. However, if we're going to be honest, there are variations within the Masoretic text. And there are key variations within the Masoretic text. They pierced my hands and my feet is one reading in the Masoretic text. They clawed at my hands is another reading at the same point. When Jeremiah 31 is quoted in the book of Hebrews, the Hebrew behind the Greek that is quoted, because being quoted from the Greek Septuagint, even though I did not care for them, is what the Greek says. The Hebrew says, even though I was a husband to them. The Hebrew behind that is the difference between Baal and Gaal. One letter difference. And the two letters are somewhat similar to one another in shape, especially in Proto-Hebrew. So, those are realities that have to be dealt with and recognized. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. And the other thing to recognize is the book of Jeremiah has a completely different textual history than the book of Isaiah does. Now, the book of Jeremiah tells us why. Remember? Jeremiah tells us, the king took his prophecy, his scrolls, and cut it up with a penknife, basically. Well, so much for that one. I guess I'll have to produce another one. Oh, so he was having to produce multiple versions of his prophecy, and then he's shipped off to Egypt. And there's reasons why the Greek Septuagint version of Jeremiah is a third shorter than the Masoretic. There's a historical reason for it. So the Isaiah scroll argument is a good argument, but it only says so much. And when people try to make it say more than that, so when the guy presented it to Bart Ehrman, I sat back. I knew what he was going to say, and I could have said it for him. But he says, but that's very true. However, Jeremiah in the Greek set, and the poor guy had no idea how to respond to that because he had probably never heard of it before. So where we get into trouble is when we get into these conversations, we start making these claims, and we haven't read deeply enough in the whole field to recognize I can only go so far with this particular claim before I'm standing out on a limb and I'm starting to hear creaking and cracking behind me. And I need to be careful. Okay?
Around 1500 CE. And the overwhelming majority of those manuscripts come in the second half of that window. So come in the medieval period after 1000 CE.
Yeah, that's true. Though and this is going to be part of the important part here, in comparison to any other work of antiquity, the reality is that the earlier testimony from the New Testament is better than any other work of antiquity. We have to be really careful about that. There are other works of antiquity that have broad manuscript testimony, Homer especially. But as far as getting close to the original, I don't think there's anything that can even come close to the New Testament. But yes, the bulk, when we talk about 5,000, let's say big number, 5,800 Greek manuscripts, vast majority of those are after 1,000. But the number of papyri that we have, the number of early uncials that we have that have vast portions of the New Testament, no other work of antiquity comes close to that. Really doesn't.
And most of them are in Latin as well. They're being
yeah. I rarely think about adding that in specifically. Normally when I refer to the numbers of manuscripts we have, I'm limiting that primarily to original language manuscripts, according to Greek. And so he's thinking 27,000. I'm not really thinking along those lines.
Transmitted during the medieval period. When we look at Greek manuscripts, we have a little over 5,800 Greek manuscripts. And again, the overwhelming majority of them come in the latter half of that window. Here's a chart showing the century which our earliest Greek New Testament manuscripts come from.
Now, it's interesting. I didn't get any feeling in listening to, and this is a short video. It's not showing it right here. Anyways, I think it was like 6 minutes, something like that. I didn't get the feeling that this is his area, or that he's familiar with CBGM or the ECM, at least as far as functionally. Because you'll notice it says he has here Alexandrian, Egyptian, eclectic, Western, and Byzantine. I mean, there's a majority of folks have already pretty much totally abandoned the idea that there is such a thing as the Western text at all. The only text type that CBGM has actually verified so far, and I don't think the Revelation publication is going to change this, is the Byzantine. The use of text type language, and if you read my King James only book, it's all through it. It's all we had at the time. I wrote that long before CBGM came along. All that's changing, and that's a good thing, by the way. See, traditionalists go, no, that's a bad thing. No, it's a good thing. If you just put your traditions down for a second, what we're talking about is the most in-depth analysis of the New Testament manuscripts that has ever been done. There's never been a time before when we could have done. That's a good thing. That's a proper thing. And it's not going to be done for a long time. And that's what bugs people. I want to, you got to have the firm text right now, but that's how you ended up with the Latin Vulgate as the only text for a long time. And people got burned at the stake for wanting something better. So stop it.
And also the textual tradition to which they belong. So the dark maroon in the back, the Byzantine tradition, is where the overwhelming majority come from, and they come from after 800 CE, and that is also the tradition that has the most variation from what is generally considered to be the most reliable tradition.
Sort of. Again, CBGM, when you look, and the nice thing in the printed editions, I'm sure it's online too, but the printed editions, I'm going to go to 430 and then we'll cut there. So, they provide an appendix where they note all the changes that have been made from the previous edition, the Essialan text, to what they're producing now. The number of changes have been very small, which would indicate we have been doing a decent job beforehand. But taken as a group, there is more of a movement, there is a correction, and there is more of a movement toward the Byzantine rather than away from the Byzantine. Now, there are a few examples going the other way, but in general, like Manuscript 33 has vaulted in its importance. It's seen to be an extremely reliable manuscript with high coherence with important witnesses and things like that. And so I get what he's saying, but again, it doesn't sound like he's familiar with what's happening with CBGM or hasn't worked the modules or done stuff like that, which very few people have. I'm not faulting him for that. I'm just simply saying that's something that I hear when I'm listening to what he's saying.
In the first 300 years of the transmission of the New Testament, we have maybe 124 manuscripts.
That's interesting because that's the number that Dan Wallace uses. And I think I used the same number in my debate with Bart Ehrman. And, Bart tried to argue with, which manuscripts are we necessarily talking about. But that's a fairly safe number, and it's an amazing number. It's an amazing number. Why is it an amazing number? It's an amazing number because of the fact that we're talking about a corpus of texts produced by a minority religion that was hated by the most powerful governmental entity known at the time in the world. And we know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that that governmental entity known as the Roman Empire sought to not only destroy the religion, but to destroy the documents of the religion. So a papyrus found 1990s, maybe early 2000s in Egypt that documented the persecution that took place. The high point of persecution was right before persecution stopped. So the very beginning of the 4th century, about 10 years there, starting around 300-ish. And this papyri talks about what they had taken from various churches, and specifically the number of manuscripts that they had taken and destroyed, that the Romans had taken and destroyed. So the fact that we have what we have, given the nature of papyrus, and the fact that, in places like Italy, that's not a place that's highly conducive for paper documents to survive for 2,000 years. Having 124 manuscripts in the first 3 centuries, I do not believe there is any other work of antiquity that comes even close to that. Even close to that. And the nice thing about that is that they are not coming from just one spot. They're coming from multiple spots, which is what you want. You don't want just one place, because that one place can be controlled. But when it comes from multiple sources, you can't control the multiple sources. So the 124 manuscripts is a good thing. So I think we'll just eventually, what this is going to get into is, how do we know, given that there's a line, we don't have anything before this time period. How do we know about that dark period? What happened in there? That was my goal when I started doing doctoral work in South Africa, was to try to use that manuscript as a foundation, because P45 draws from sources that are different in their textual orientation. So my whole idea was, can that give us a window into that period before? That's what then forced me directly to run smack dab into CBGM. And sadly, my Dr. Votter had a major heart attack during COVID and had to retire. And I wanted to do it with him because he did his PhD under Metzger. So would still love to do that. But I'm not sure I'd be able to do that in the gulag, which, depending on what happens in the elections in 2024. So, anyway. So we'll continue on with this. I'm not sure when that's going to be, because you're gone the rest of the week. Friday? I have got so many things going on. We'll see if we can't do that. We'll have to try to figure it out. We'll see. But we will continue. We will try to do another program. Rich got some stuff going on. I've got trying to catch up with all the stuff that you fall behind after all the surgeries and traveling and everything else. And it's insane. It's good stuff. Meeting with folks and it's all good stuff, but it's still challenging. We will continue on with this. I hope this is helpful to a lot of folks. Most programs are not going to scroll across the coherence attestations modules in CBGM on their program. I realize that, but there's a reason to do it. And I hope you understand that. I hope it's useful to you. We'll see you next time. God bless.